On the subject of the conference, Global Interchanges, when we were shooting around ideas on what to discuss, it was pretty apparent that the work that we do as international designers is very much the scope of global interchange. Many of us have clients that are US-based who are now broadening their horizons and moving to foreign locations, including China, of course. And for the offices that we have that are in Asia, we see a lot of our Asia-based clients doing the same and diversifying their portfolio and investing in the US. And of course, we're all comfortable with what we know and afraid of what we don't, so the sort of diversification can cause a lot of challenges and anxiety. And the process of those different geographies, so with regards to the design process as well as just the general cultural interaction and communication are probably the hardest issues. And our firm, as a result of working out of 10 offices around the world with many high caliber clients, has taught us an immense amount. And as a result, for new clients, that experience can be very advantageous. And so we're going to just quickly walk through some of our explorations in some of those projects today. Courtesy of the New York Times, for those of you who have been watching China's stock market, there's been a lot of graphics lately with regards to their economy and of course, their foreign investment. So it's interesting to note this graphic here, which discusses their foreign investments in 2005, and then 8 years later, ninefold, up to $86.5 billion, with 15.3 of that coming to the US. And another interesting metric is the US investment in China. It's been sort of slow but steady, and then near the time of our recession, there's a huge peak and a doubling of that number. So clearly indicative of our market not absorbing, and with their urbanization efforts, the ability to move our development goals over there. And then consequently, if you then look at China's investment back into the US, we see a similar trend. It's slow and steady, right around 2008, at the peak of when we were accelerating. They start to pick up, and then it appears almost as if an oversaturation of us moving east has then doubled their investment moving back west around 2012, resulting in this metric here, which is pretty astounding. By 2014, China was the largest buyer of US homes, surpassing Canada.
So with the movement of investment back and forward between different countries, we found ourselves in some interesting positions where traditionally we would have a client in the US with a project in the US, and then we would have a US client who would be investigating opportunities in China, and that would result in us, with our offices in China, that would result in us explaining to clients the various cultural differences that you get involved in with the design process and the quality process that's involved. And then a few years after that, we would get clients from China starting to invest in the United States. And what would happen is that it wouldn't become just a straight developer project, it would become introductions to joint venture partners in both sides, and we would have this ongoing dialogue which would go back and forth between the US and China, also not just China but Asia in general. And we would originally be bringing ideas for sort of mixed use and design ideas from the United States, but what we've been finding lately is that more of these ideas are coming from Asia or China back towards the middle, to the USA. And we find ourselves quite often in these situations where almost like a lubricant in the middle of the process, where we're making introductions to developers and clients on both sides of the pond, so to speak. And that's quite challenging. So we were going to look at some case studies that result from this process, East and West, and the mixing of cultures, etc. We've got 4 projects to show you. 2 are by Asia-based developers, 1 local and 1 abroad, and 2 are by US-based developers, 1 local and 1 abroad. Both began, we worked with both of these companies, developers, towards the late 1990s as individual developers in the US and 1 in China. And as they expanded into each country, we expanded with them until, over 20 years, we're now doing some very major projects in both sides of the pond. So these case studies will illustrate, I hope, the results and the achievements and the challenges that we face as we go through these. So, you want to do this one?
Yeah, so we sort of identified as a grading scale, or at least a measure of evaluating 4 principles: the logistics of working globally versus locally, depending on the geography, then the government participation, the design process, and the construction process. So for the first topic, working locally versus globally, in Asia, it's a bit different than what you're used to in the US, wherein the development criteria is often set ahead of time by the local jurisdiction or the local government, not only the program, but also the site. And then the development program is often fixed at that point. In addition, there's an LDI that's involved and instrumental not only in the execution of the project, but in the cultural and communication relationship between the design team, the client, and the government. US, a bit different. The development criteria is established by the developer in saying basically they choose the site they want, and they have the ability to be flexible with the program of the building as long as it's in conformance with zoning, of course. And then there's no LDI here, which puts the architect in the role of key leader for the project and becomes then the sort of glue between the agency approval process and the client.
In government participation, we find in Asia, particularly in China, the government really participates from the inception of the project. Whereas in the United States, the government more regulates from established zoning codes and regulations. In China in particular, the government, right down to the level of the mayor, for example, he will act as almost like a partner in setting the pace and the requirements for the project, whereas in the US it's more of an overview authority or a regulatory authority. And that's one of the main differences between, with government participation, that local officials in China get personally involved in the project, whereas in the United States, they've got a limited involvement in the actual programming and design of the project.
And then for the design process, again, there's some subtle changes, some not so subtle. The management of the design process is usually by the government / developer in the cases that they're pairing in Asia. In the US, it's merely by the developer, a much more streamlined process and much easier with regards to communication and meeting the interests of one entity as opposed to 2. For Asia, the LDI is responsible for CDs, and as a result, the construction administration. Again, in the US, that's not the case. The architect takes that responsibility and works in concert with the general contractor. And then another interesting thing is that the design team is generally appointed by the developer because of this mix of interactions with the government and the LDI. Where again, in the US, while the developer has a huge say in the ultimate selection, the architect is essentially appointing and contracting those team members.
As far as the construction process is concerned, there's quite a few differences. The LDI and the developer are essentially responsible for the construction administration of the projects in China, whereas in the US, the architect will be more responsible for that role or for that process during the construction administration phase. The architect the design architect in Asia or in China, we tend to provide design review roles during construction, whereas of course in the United States it's a full service, tends to be more of a full service during construction. So in Asia generally, there's also multiple contracts. They would start, especially with the larger projects, they would start with a substructure or an excavation package, and quite often, while that's being built, they will finish the design for the superstructure, and often multiple contracts after that, facades, M&E, lifts, elevators, etc. Whereas in the United States, it tends to be a single GMP, a guaranteed maximum price sum. That's the sort of main differences to that. So that's leading us on to some of the case studies that we will talk about now. The first one is Taikoo Hoy, which is in Guangzhou. This was for a large Hong Kong developer, which was interesting in that it was their first development in China. And there was a steep learning curve with that. The project is about 4.5 million square feet of mixed-use space. It's connected to the street levels. It's connected to the MTR, or the subway, as you say, in New York City. It's 2 office towers, a hotel, a cultural center, and a retail podium and basement. So here, is there a pointer thing, or is it this thing here? Here you can see the site plan. The 2 office towers are towards the front here. The hotel tower is towards the back, and the long curving building is the cultural center. The roof of the podium is public space, and it's all landscaped to draw tenants and occupants from the towers down, and also from people from the retail and from the streets up. This is a view. The project was opened in 2010. You can see the tallest 100,000 square or 1 million square feet office tower, and 600,000 square feet office tower to the left. And you can see the landscaped garden on top of the podium there. This is a view looking between the towers, and you can see the skylights, which bring natural sunlight down into the retail below, and you can see the connection into the cultural center and also into the hotel along that edge. These are some views along the street edge. This is a view on the roof of the podium, where you can see that it's almost like a side street with cafes spilling out onto the landscape, and on the left-hand side, that's the skylight access down into the retail. Reco City Centre is for the same developer that came to build in Miami from Hong Kong, from China. This is a similar sort of mix, except that it's got residential, which is more a better response to the Miami market. It's about 5.5 million square feet. It includes office towers, retail. The retail integrates the whole complex together, and it's got a hotel, and recently added another taller tower, a mixed-use tower, to the development. This is the site. It's in central, right in the center of Miami, in Reco. You can see there's a tall office tower to the right, which is an 80-story tower, which will be residential, office, and hotel. There's a hotel tower at the bottom. There's 3 residential towers you can see here, and up here, and then there's 2 office towers, the more white ones that you can see there, and these are all integrated together with retail and bridges that cross the streets and so forth. This is the project. You can see the very tall tower there. This is how it fits into Miami. This is a montage of the project. This is the hotel. It's called East, and these are the residential buildings on the side. And you can see the retail fitting in there with there's a climate ribbon that we integrated into this retail. These are 2 versions of the tower. The tall tower, which is 80 stories. You can see by the patterns that it's office, then residential, and hotel at the very top of the tower there. This is the retail showing you how the bridges connect across the streets. Rather than an enclosed mall, as you would sometimes get in both the United States or in China, we tried to keep the public circulation space as open as possible, and we created what we call a climate ribbon, which reflects heat and reflects bright sunlight, and it attracts breezeways and cool air in through the fins and the slats to cool the space. We catch it off the water, and it has a great environmental impact, and it reduces the power consumption of the building, and it makes for a more comfortable environment for the users. These are just some of the views showing the bridges connecting over the roadways. We weren't able to change any of the road networks in Miami for this, so we had to connect them above. I'll hand over to Sam for these other projects.
Okay, and then moving over to our US-based developer, we're going to look at, again, 2 of their projects, one that we've done with them locally, and then one that we've assisted with them over in China. The first is what we call Infinity and Lumina. Infinity is phase 1, and was completed in 2009. Each of them are around 1.3 million square feet. The total development is around 1,300 units for sale in the Rincon Hill district of San Francisco. And in addition to the 1,300 units, there's 330 off-site affordable housing. And this is was a tricky project in the sense of its timing and its opening. As I mentioned, the first phase opened in 2009, which was right after our major crash, and we were at the bottom of the slump. Amazingly, the project sold 200 units. Was the first building post-recession to sell 200 units of condo, and this happened in short order right after opening. Lumina is expected to open in 2016. It carries many of the same standards, but this is a significant project because it sort of set a standard for exemplary communication and cooperation on the part of the design team and the developer with the city to achieve the affordable housing goals amidst the financial crisis that would have otherwise been detrimental to the project completion. In addition to that, if it didn't get any worse, during excavation, there was a 19th century whaling ship discovered, and so a team of archaeologists were deployed to archive the site and document it, which again delayed the project to the point that the construction pushed through even more rigorous times of construction during the recession. So, and then this is phase 2 now in the current market. Again, this is another 600 units, and for both of them, what's quite interesting is obviously in order to achieve the densities required for affordable units to make sense, we look to high-rise buildings, but because of the fabric of the neighborhood, there was the need to have public open space on top of the plazas that are between these towers. And we also were in a position to incorporate low-rise around the street front, which integrated at the base of the towers in order to sort of plug into the network and fabric of that neighborhood. And then moving over into China, this is in Tianjin. We know this as Yujiapu. This was part of a new financial center in the Benhai area. And the developer was teamed with a local developer in Tianjin who was actually responsible for overseeing the entire district. So, US developer was teamed with an Asian developer. And of course, so since they're looking at the overall project as a district master plan, and we're looking at more of a case-by-case development, there were some differences in overarching goals and objectives, but at 4.5 million square feet, this is no small project with a mix of uses that was to create a new urban center with hotels, residential units, office, retail, and a substantial below-grade parking component. Here you can see the general layout of the site, the green area. The entire 4-block section or 6-block section has below-grade parking to connect everything. Then there's a main green space similar to our Central Park with cultural centers scattered amongst it. There's an office building on the left, which is the highest component. And then the two on the lower left are the hotel and service apartments connected by retail. And then moving to the right, where the connection is greatest to the public open space, is where the residential component is. And as the project went along, there were several red flags that came up, and we're showing you a project that actually did not go forward. This is a project where the developer decided to call it quits and walk away. There were several challenges. The market conditions changed over the time of the design process. Several infrastructural issues became gaps. Transportation was not in place at the point that they thought it would be, and just general site readiness was not there. So, the developer made a decision to uphold to their standards of development, which got them through 30 years of becoming who they were. And you can see here a little design evolution with the office building on the right. There were various iterations of residential buildings and office building, of hotel buildings. But as we moved through, the buildings became, value engineered down to the point that the facades became a little less open instead of floor-to-ceiling windows. As the clients used to delivering for Class A residential, they started to become more punched opening, and by the end, the building was nowhere near what we had wanted it to be and what they had set their goals to be. So it brings the dialogue of when you're going to different areas, knowing when to say when and knowing when to rely on the foundations of your team that have given you the great history and the great reputation that you have.
So, in conclusion, we have discovered over the years that in order to make these projects successful, where we have a US developer in China or we have a Chinese developer in the US, one of the key things, obviously, is experience. But it's experience looking at things from a much more global perspective. Sam's explanation of that project in China, that last slide, was a sad example for us, where a US developer was just not ready for that process, for the China process, where the government will say things like, "Don't worry, everything will be okay," and it's not what they expect. And the other issues that we have noticed is that where a developer has the vision that is matched by the architect's vision, of course, as well, but vision and creativity and flexibility to adjust to those cultural conditions in both directions is quite critical to the process. And that's really the points that we've concluded on.